it has been a quiet week in Lake Wobegon, Minnesota, my old hometown, a town the years forgotten, the decades cannot change. Been a holiday week, not just one holiday, but two. Christmas last Sunday and today, New Year's. A whole week of holidays. It's a time, I think, this morning when there are probably a whole lot of people who are not exactly feeling bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Red-eyed, maybe. Already this morning, there's probably a large number of people who have had a few too many hairs of the dog that was biting them last night. Holiday week, Christmas week in Lake Wobegon. It's a time when all the exiles return home. You know, all the kids who were born here and grew up and then moved away and found their one true love in life and got married and had a family and are raising a family all their own and have discovered all kinds of new and interesting ways in which to complicate their lives. A time when those exiles return back home and discover a town that is so unchanged and looks so much like the town in which they grew up, like the town when they were 12 years old, that it's hard not to come back to it and become 12 years old all over again. Which, as I think about it, is how some of them acted this year when they came back to town, like 12-year-olds. A lot of them come up back to Lake Wobegon up from the cities where they've moved, bring their families back with them, make, for old time's sake, a stop at the Crossroads Lounge, which is about 10 miles out of town. And then they pile back in the car again and come up over the rise and begin coming down into Lake Wobegon. And there are a whole lot of last drags on last cigarettes that are taken. And there are the first of a whole lot of breath mints that are popped in the mouth for this visit. And there are, in most of those cars, the last warnings issued to the offspring in the back seat. Warnings about what not to talk about in front of Grandma and Grandpa. And remember, before supper at Grandma and Grandpa's house, when Grandpa bows his head, you are to close your eyes and bow your head too, because that's called asking the blessing, saying grace. It's when Grandpa is talking to God. So you remember to close your eyes and don't you say a word. That was the conversation, or the monologue really, that was going on in Jimmy Olson's car. Jimmy grew up in Lake Wobegon, was bringing the kids back home with him and his wife. And he was a little bit surprised to hear a voice pipe up from the back seat when he gave that speech about the warning. It was his daughter, and she asked, "Daddy, who is God?" And Jimmy said, well, I won't tell you the first thing he said, but then Jimmy said, "What am I going to do now? 2 blocks from home, it's a little late to be shining this kid up to look Lutheran, don't you think?" But then, he went on, but then I don't know why she can't ask that question. It's a legitimate question that's been asked by Lutheran theologians by the dozens over the decades and the centuries. So why can't a kid ask it? Who is God? Well, of course, it's not just kids who get shined up at Christmas time in Lake Wobegon. There are an awful lot of homes in Lake Wobegon that have gotten along just fine during the last year on tuna fish casserole and maybe a cheese and noodle bake in the oven, hamburger hot dish. But when Christmas rolls around, there is some fancy cooking that goes on in this town. This year, there were hors d'oeuvres served at the Olson's house. Hors d'oeuvres, if you can believe it. Never been seen before in this house. Food set right down there on the coffee table in the living room. And the dog thought they were for him, so he had a little bit of them. But of course, the hors d'oeuvres weren't for the dog. They were for the daughter, for Claudia and her husband Todd, who now live in Chicago, where they are very active in the arts. Mom and Dad thought it would be doing the right thing to serve hors d'oeuvres on the coffee table, so they did. Over at the Ingfist house, Virginia served up a 30-pound turkey. 30 pounds! But she tried out a new recipe, one that involved deboning the turkey breast and then rolling back some of the skin on the turkey breast and making a kind of dressing pate and then scooching it up under the skin and rolling the skin back down and then using a piece of string to tie the whole thing back together again. All of which she had seen some woman do on Good Morning America in about 45 seconds flat with maybe 2 twists of a peeling knife. But I tell you, it was a harrowing experience for Virginia. By the time she got done with that, it looked like it had been involved in a head-on collision with something. And Virginia's hair was hanging down in her face, and she was cursing quietly under her breath. Turkey just had a problem. She put it in the oven, of course, and now and then she'd go back and squirt a little juice on it. But then, when she went back after about 3 hours, it was all just in a heap in the roasting pan. Wouldn't have been recognizable to its closest friend. But Virginia is a valiant woman, she is. She yanked that thing out of there, took the meat and whacked it apart, then tossed it in a casserole dish, threw in a cup of sherry and a cup of cream and whatever spices might be at hand. Then she sprinkled flour over top of it, and then she whacked in half an orange and covered the whole thing with the freshly squeezed orange juice. Put it back in the oven and let it go for another hour or so. When she took it back out, she dumped it out, served the turkey in bowls around that Christmas dinner table. Maybe you've never seen it before, but it was good. Chip's friend was in the kitchen with her, and when she was doing all that, Virginia said to her, "It's called turkey à l'orange. It's an old family favorite. Why? And you'll love it." And as I said, they did love it. It was good. The ingredients are all good. It's provender. You put the hay down where the goats can get it. And they did. Well, if your kids come back at Christmas time or at New Year's, and they aren't exactly the same kids that you thought you raised and nurtured oh so carefully, well, we're all strong people. We can all get by. And Christmas, especially Christmas, that's a time when we're not supposed to be critical of all the little details, all the small faux pas. At the Bostrom home, they finished off their turkey, which was prepared and served in the more traditional way. And then after dinner, Clarence, who you may know sprained his ankle yesterday very severely, Clarence took himself one step at a time back up to his bedroom so he could rest. It was all he could do to sit at that dinner table to force himself to eat that turkey dinner in an upright position, but he did it. And then Brother Dwayne went across the road where he'd spent several hours with cousins. which left Carol Sue and her mother Arlene, as well as Carol Sue's new husband, Bill. They had come up from St. Cloud, the first Christmas for Bill. And after the meal, he took himself into the living room, plopped down in a chair, picked up an old magazine and pretended to read it, but he was exhausted. He was exhausted by family reminiscence that meant nothing to him, by a whole string of unrecognizable names, and by private in-jokes, the punchlines of which, after all, were not funny at all to him. It was kind of like the experience you have when you're a college kid and you go off to the first day of class and you sit yourself down in the classroom, and then you discover as the professor gets up and begins the lecture that you are in the wrong room. And you can't exactly leave after the lecture has begun. So you stick it out. That's how Bill felt. Well, that left Carol Sue and her mom. And they started working on what was left of this dinner, the wreckage of it. Worked on it there in the kitchen, and Carol Sue was just as glad that nobody had offered to help. It had actually been a long time since she and her mother had worked like that in their kitchen, the way they had when she was growing up, for hours and hours during those years. There's something special about working in the kitchen like that. You can just come out with things that, if you came out with them sitting at the dinner table, would be too abrupt. They would sound almost rude, and people would look at you. But there in the kitchen, there's kind of a close silence that surrounds you. And you can say things, make little announcements, which is what Carol Sue did. We'd like to go to Chicago, but we need to borrow some money. You can say these things without even looking at the person you want to hear it. Or, I went to see the baby doctor last week. Now that's an announcement you can make. Or maybe just ask questions that have been bothering you. Am I smart? Am I good looking? And over the years, her mother had said to her so many times, hands still in the dish water, cleaning the dishes, we want you to know how proud we are of you. You can just release these sentences off into the air. Well, as they worked on the dishes, Arlene washing and Carol Sue drying them, suddenly Arlene began to sing. They always used to do that. And they sang together. And Carol Sue discovered in the singing and the drying that she knew where everything still went. Amazing. The meat platter, which she didn't really need very often, at least in Lake Wobegon during the year, that went up in the cabinet way up high, inconveniently high, above the refrigerator. And then the colander that they'd used for draining some things, that went down to the left of the sink, about shin level, in that cabinet. And the gravy boat went up here, just behind the boxes of cereal. She remembered all that, just like she'd never been gone. And that little centerpiece from the dining room table, the plaster creche, the nativity scene with the plaster Mary and the plaster Joseph and the plaster manger with the plaster baby Jesus in it, with the plaster cow that was evidently lowing and the plaster yellow star that was glued fast to the top of the staple. Well, that got wiped off with a damp cloth. Not wet, damp. And then it was put away in the china cabinet until this time next year, when it would come out again. Little things, familiar things, intimate things that you really don't think about or really need to think about at any other time of the year, except at Christmas. Those are so important, those little things. It makes me wonder if that isn't exactly the way God intended it, that we would find special and, in a way, profound meaning in those little things. After all, isn't that what Christmas is about, anyway? Or at least supposed to be about the profound meaning of little things, tiny things. Christmas is when we celebrate that God loves us so much that He proved it by giving us a little tiny baby born and laid in a manger. Just a wee little guy. And the world has never been the same since. And it never will be the same. Well, that's the news from Lake Wobegon, Minnesota, where all the women are strong and all the men are good looking and all the children are above average.